Democrats have consistently overseen the stronger economic growth, more job creation, and better stock market performance than any Republican administration over the last 60 years. If you don't believe me, you can go back all the way back to LBJ. I'm not gonna I was gonna go through each of these presidents, but it would be just mind numbing to go through all of these presidents' economic stuff and whatever. Um, but LBJ, who took office after Kennedy was assassinated, which was a Lyndon Baines Johnson was a Democratic president, was vice president, became president when Kennedy was assassinated. He had GDP growth of 4.9%. GDP, for those of you who don't know, is the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within the country's border. GDP growth is an indicator of a country's and economic performance. When GDP grows, it generally means that the economy is expanding. More goods and services are being produced, people are spending more and investing more, and employment typically rises. So he had almost a 5% growth during his presidency from 63 to 69. Richard Nixon, which was a Republican governor, Richard Nixon, which was a Republican president, um, he unfortunately, resigned in the middle of his term, but his economic policies started hunting the country in the 70s into the Ford administration, which was into the Ford administration, which was Ford was a Republican, and the growth was only 2%. Everything went belly up between Nixon and Ford, which ushered in Jimmy Carter, which Jimmy Carter's presidency, because it was a lot of his presidency was overshadowed by the Iran Contra situation, but the economy grew almost 4%. Ronald Reagan, an economy that was booming. His tax cuts, trickle down economics, goes the economy. And then George W. Bush gets elected. George W. Bush, the first one, elected. He saw 2% growth. And because the economy was so bad, 8 years of Reagan and 2 years for George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush was the vice president to Ronald Reagan, then became president. So we're talking 8 and 4. 12 years of Republican presidency. The economy was in the toilet when Bill Clinton took over. And then Bill Clinton grew the GDP, his administration, his policies. He grew over to by an average of 4% every year. And at the end of his years, Bill Clinton was the first president in a decade to balance the budget and have a budget. And then after that, who came into office? George W. Bush. And then George W. Bush destroyed all gains made and went into this thing called the Great Recession. You guys forget, the banks collapsed, the housing market collapsed, all of that happened, the Iraq War, all of that shit, the Iraq and Afghanistan War, all of that happened in just 2 terms. When he left the office, the economy was in a free fall. There seemed to be no end in sight for the country sliding off of a cliff when Barack Obama took over. And in his term, 3.5% growth, 11 million new jobs created. Stock market soared to record highs, doubling values in its 2 terms. Healthcare reform. That's what happened. Donald Trump took office. His first term, old term, grew 2.5%. And that was largely driven by the continuation of Obama policies. And then all of a sudden, we got COVID, and then we got a terrible tax bill. And that shrank the economy by 4%. And then Joe Biden took over a failing economy. And guess what's going on with the economy now under Joe Biden? If you think, well, let me back up. Here's the bottom line. Over 60 years of Democratic presidents have overseen larger economic growth and more job creations and better stock market performance than the Republicans. Despite all of the Republican bluster about being the party of business, the facts speaks for themselves. Every time a Democrat steps into the Oval Office, the economy improves. Every time the Republican, on the other hand, steps in, they leave a trail of debt and recession behind them. That's not an opinion. That's the cold, hard facts. But the propaganda says something different, but that's not. I don't care about propaganda. I care about the facts. Voting for Republican does not mean the economy will get better. That's a myth, a lie that's been sold to the working family for decades. And it's time to put that lie to bed. The facts are staring us right in the face. But too many people are blinded because they bought into this outdated notion that Republicans are good for business. They're good for business owners. They're good for corporations. They're good for that. They're not good for American family, your paycheck, your economic growth in your family. They have never been. They're on the side of the corporation, not the side of you. If you think voting for Republican is a vote for economic prosperity, let me hit you with some cold hard truth. Democratic presidents have overseen stronger economic growth, created more jobs, and built better outcomes for families than Republicans. And if you're still clinging to the fantasy that the Republicans have a magic touch when it comes to the economy, let's talk about how Donald Trump absolutely squandered the economy that President Obama left him, and left us with an inflation, tax hikes, and long-term financial damage that we're dealing with now. When Donald Trump took office in 2017, he inherited an economy that was booming and robust. And under Obama, the country had just came out of the Great Recession. And by the time Trump sat down in the Oval Office, the economy was moving along like a well-oiled machine. Job growth was strong. The stock market had doubled. And the Republican Party grew and the GDP was growing steadily. Obama's policies, from the stimulus package to saving the auto industry, from financial reform, had laid the foundation for a thriving economy, and all Trump had to do was not a damn thing. But what did he do instead? Instead of building on what was already a healthy economy, Trump passed the most reckless tax bill in American history. The Tax Cut and Job Act of 2017 that slashed taxes for the top 1% in corporations, ballooning the deficit and setting the stage for long-term financial instability, which is what we're dealing with right now. Trump's tax credit is the reason why inflation is going the way it's going. As long and the long-term effects of Trump's tax cuts, inflation, by putting trillions of dollars into the pockets of the wealthy who don't need it, while providing little relief to everyday Americans, the common man, the economy has overheated. Now we're dealing with inflation that's driving up the cost of everything: gas, rent, mortgages, food, while wages ain't keeping up with inflation. That's what you get with Republican policies: a short term gain for rich, long term pain for everybody else. Republicans are not good for your family, they're good for the rich. Let's stop pretending like the Republican Party is for family economics. They're not. They're good for the rich, the corporations, the CEOs, but the average working family, they leave us behind every single time. Trump's tax bill is the perfect example. It was a nightmare on whatever's left of the middle class. It's a promise to help. It was promised to help the middle class, but in reality, it was a giveaway to the wealthy. And now that bill is due now. And here's the kicker: many Americans who are actually seeing their taxes go up now because of the way the tax bill was structured and those initial tax cuts. And you know who they're blaming? They're blaming fucking Joe Biden. And Joe Biden had nothing to do with that goddamn tax bill. Joe Biden wasn't president then. He was a private citizen. And I'm not defending Mr. Magoo. That tax bill was a bait and switch. It was a con job, just like the president is. Or at the time, the President Trump. And this isn't just about Trump. This is a pattern with Republican presidents. They pass tax cuts for the rich, deregulate industries, and then talk a big game about job creation. But what actually happens? The rich get richer, the deficit balloons, and the working class gets left holding the bill. Trump and his Reagan with his funky ass trickle down economics. George W. Bush, who squandered a fucking surplus and then led us into the Great Recession. And then Donald Trump, that obliterated a booming economy with his reckless tax cut, devastating what's left of the middle class. The idea that Republican presidents are somehow better for the economy is some bullshit. Plain and simple. It's a lie that's been sold to the average American for generations, but the facts don't back it up. Democrats create more in better shape than they found it. Democratic president has left it better than what they got.